longtime colleague of mine, and she is going to be sharing some of her award-winning work that she's been doing with Tweeting Your Story. And if you are, I actually would like to welcome everyone far and wide here. We have folks coming from the East Coast, where I'm sure they're really glad to have a webinar and can stay in the house with all the snow they've recently got. Welcome to our friends in the Heritage area. And we have some upcoming sessions that I just want to remind folks about. On February 2nd, we'll have another winter webinar on selling your site using the Iowa Core. The presenter will be Laura Elfers, our new Education Interpretation Manager. She'll be sharing ways to connect to the Iowa Core and our agricultural connections. We will also have a session on February 25th on best practices in telling the modern ag story. We will have some folks within the Heritage area sharing their experiences, and they've got some great things to share. Also then on March 4th, we will have a session on our General Grants Program, and I will be presenting on that for you. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, use that chat function to make a call out to us so we can try to help if there are any problems. And after the session, please send us some feedback. You will receive an email with an evaluation, and we'd love to hear from you so that we can make sure we're providing the best programming possible. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Julie McPike. She has so many wonderful things to share, and thank you, Julie, for taking the time to do this today for us. We really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks to everybody for calling in today. I'm Julie McPike. I'm the Managing Director at Freedom's Frontier National Heritage Area, and we're located in eastern Kansas and western Missouri. A couple of housekeeping things. If anybody has questions for me as I move through the presentation, the webinar, feel free to type those in that chat box if there's something that maybe I didn't explain well enough or a point of clarification. Then we'll have some time at the end of the call as well. I think Erin will open the phone lines, and we can just deal with some of those questions also then at the end. So the other thing that I wanted to share with people as I move through the webinar is on the right-hand side of your screen you'll see a trending box. So kind of keep your eyes there. As my colleagues and I reflected on this project, we noticed different themes and different ideas about what worked, different surprises, and we kind of recorded those, and I'm sharing in that space some of what I think are the most important ideas. So what was this thing all about? That's kind of what I'm going to go through, and as I go through our experience with the Twitter reenactment, I hope that you all can pull out some goals and pull out some ideas that apply to using social media to interpret history, to creating successful social media campaigns, and some ideas for involving the public in this job that we have of doing history. So in 2013, August 21st, 2013, to be exact, we in Freedom's Frontier helped to put on a Twitter reenactment. We worked collaboratively with a bunch of cultural institutions and community members in Lawrence to produce a reenactment of Quantrills Raid, and this reenactment occurred entirely within Twitter. The reenactment ended up going viral, and its reach exceeded our expectations. And I'm, going to take you through the process of how we did that today. One thing, if you take nothing else away from this, one thing that I want you guys all to know is what I think the secret to our success was involving community members. I've seen several different Twitter reenactments happen since QR 1863. None of them have been quite as big in terms of just sheer numbers, and I think the difference between what we did and what other people have done is that we included, we created a space for community members to participate, and that really jazzed the folks here in Lawrence. They got excited about it, and they wanted all of their followers on Twitter to see what they were doing with this reenactment. So I think we got a much bigger piece of Twitter's real estate because of that. Okay, so why did we pick Quantrills Raid? First of all, the main reason that we decided to use Quantrills Raid was that this Twitter reenactment was always conceived of as a Twitter reenactment of Quantrills Raid. We didn't have the idea to do a Twitter reenactment and then search around for a topic. It was always the two were together. The idea came from a conversation, kind of a jokey conversation among reporters in the newsroom at the Lawrence Journal-World, and this conversation ended up posing a question: what would Lawrence's Twitter feed have looked like if Twitter existed during Quantrills Raid? So Quantrills Raid happened in 1863. It was part of this very long war that took place between folks in Missouri and Kansas who disagreed over issues of slavery and whether Kansas would be a slave state or a free state. Began before the Civil War in 1854, and in a lot of ways it kind of devolved into a personal war centered around retribution and retaliation, and Quantrills Raid was really part of that. It was one of the biggest largest acts of war carried out on a civilian population that has ever occurred in the United States. What happened was 400 bushwhackers under the direction of William Quantrill rode into Lawrence with very little warning and almost completely burned the town down, left hundreds of widows and orphans, killed hundreds of men and boys that lived in Lawrence. So this was the event that we were trying to recreate on Twitter. Some other contributing factors as to why we chose Quantrills Raid. 1863, 2013 was the sesquicentennial year, and August 21st fell midweek. So there were major events planned to commemorate Quantrills Raid, but that was on the weekend. So we knew that we could fill that commemorative gap there. Also, this is really the biggest event in Lawrence's history, and Lawrence is a town that loves its history. Quantrills Raid is commemorated annually in Lawrence, so we knew we would have an audience. Also, there were multiple first-hand accounts and reminiscences that existed, so we had primary source material. There's a concrete beginning and a fairly concrete end, and they're close together. And for a reenactment the size of what we did, and including volunteers of what we did, focusing really on a single one-day or two-day event made it a lot easier for us to be able to organize. Also, there are a lot of untold stories within this broader, well-known narrative, and this reenactment allowed us to incorporate multiple perspectives. So most everybody in Lawrence knows what Quantrills Raid was, but they don't know those key little stories of how a particular woman who, you know, maybe wrote a lot of letters about her experiences, those haven't been incorporated into the larger narrative. Also, a lot of folks in Lawrence don't have a good understanding of why Lawrence was targeted by Quantrill, or what happened to Missourians as a result of Quantrills Raid. So we thought that this was a good way to give voice to some of those unheard voices, and also to provide a lot of multiple perspectives. As I said, oh, actually it's time for a polling question, Erin. So I kind of want to get a sense of who on the call has a personal Twitter account that they use themselves? Okay, it looks like we're almost half and half, a little more don't than do. And I also wanted to know, do you have a Twitter account that you use for your institution? So that Aaron's getting that poll queued up, it looks like. Okay, it looks like the majority of people on the call have a Twitter account for their institution. Whether or not you use that Twitter account, I'd encourage everybody to join personally. I found for myself that I have a personal Twitter account, and I started it kind of before I started our business, our organization's personal account, and just being able to use it and get familiar with the medium kind of helped me understand the possibilities. So even though I just told you to get a Twitter account, that's only if you have a organizational Twitter account that you use. So I'm not going to tell you that you necessarily need to have an organizational Twitter account. I'm not going to tell you today on this call that you need to be tweeting a certain number of times each day. I'm not even going to tell you to look at Freedom's Frontiers Twitter account as a good example, because I don't think that it is a good example of how an organization can use Twitter. But what I do want to say is that if you're planning a social media campaign, there are different platforms that are going to lend themselves to different kinds of campaigns. So Twitter worked for us, but if you're doing a campaign that uses a lot of images, you might not want to use Twitter. You might want to use something like Instagram, which I'm not familiar with, but I just know that it's image-based. So do your research and kind of find out which platform is going to be right for your particular campaign. Twitter was right for us. As I said, it was always kind of conceived as this Twitter account, but also it's a platform where people regularly use it to communicate their own personal stories, and that was what we were going to do with this reenactment, is talk about people's own personal stories from the past. It's also become a place where news is broken. The first place that I ever learned of the raid on Osama bin Laden was from Twitter, and somehow we knew that something was going to break, some big news was going to break. So we had every media possibility on in our house, and Twitter was the first place that we learned about it. It's also used for organizing social action. It's used for talking about, it's used for creating this sort of citizen reporter, which really had some resonance with Quantrills Raid and what was happening in Lawrence and how people may have been using Twitter at the time. Also, we knew that Twitter would provide us an environment through which we could reflect the chaos of the day. And finally, Lawrence has a big community of Twitter users. So oftentimes during a college basketball game, KU basketball as a hashtag will trend nationally. So we thought if we could just steal a little bit of that that audience that's following KU basketball and get them to follow history, that we might have a possibility to trend. Okay, so and then we have, I think, one more poll. Erin, if you can get that going. Also, somebody asked a question if there was a hashtag for this webinar, if you want to tweet about this webinar. It looks like hashtag tweeting your story is going to be used as the hashtag for this webinar. Okay. So there's a poll open now. I kind of want to get a sense of when the last time you worked with another institution for programming was. Okay, it looks like a big majority of us, 73%, have in the past 6 months worked with somebody else to do some programming. And we couldn't have done this project on our own as Freedom's Frontier, and none of the other institutions that worked with us could have done this project on their own. So we started actually planning in November for this August event. We set these goals that you see on your screen, that we knew that Freedom's Frontier couldn't do it by itself. We knew that the CVB couldn't do it by itself, that we needed help. So we created a steering committee of sorts. So people on this committee represented us, obviously, the Lawrence Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Public Library, the History Museum. There's a social media club in Lawrence that we made sure to include, and also the official sesquicentennial commemoration arm from the city. So we have this steering committee, and we had to rely on one another because this wasn't a regular job for anybody. Everybody had their other jobs to take care of, and this on top of it. So we had to rely on each other, but we also knew the more folks that we could get invested early on, the better our following would be and the better our end result would be. So in addition to working with cultural institutions, we also brought on businesses. The media, obviously, played a big role, not only in promoting us, but the media also lent some of their staff to play characters in the reenactment. The city and county governments were involved, other Freedom's Frontier partners. We reached out to local Twitter celebrities, if you will, so we kind of found those accounts within Lawrence that had really big followings, and we encouraged them to participate in some way, whether it was just helping to promote us or whether it was to play a role. Something else that we really wanted to do, even though this reenactment took place entirely on Twitter, we really wanted to create a kind of a team in real life and have a way for people to come together and learn from one another and tweet together. So that was also another important piece of this for us. Also early in the process, we reached out to some experts. So we didn't know of anybody else that had done a Twitter reenactment, but we knew that we had some pretty good friends at the Kansas Humanities Council who were experts on telling stories in creative ways. And they have a great staff and they embrace out-of-the-box ideas. So I wanted to bring them in and include them. And initially we just brought them in for advice and to have a discussion about what it was we were doing and how we could create a product that would end up better. So we discussed that idea, and out of that discussion, they ended up providing us a mini grant to support the project. And with that mini grant, we were able to bring on project scholars. We wanted to use the project scholars to serve as mentors to the steering committee, to also help our volunteer reenactors better understand the time period. But another benefit of bringing on the project scholars was that these two gentlemen, Jeremy Neely, who is at Missouri State University, and Jonathan Earl, who at the time was at KU, they both are Twitter enthusiasts, and they both have big Twitter communities. So by bringing them on and having them talk about the project, we expanded our reach again. We actually found out afterwards that Jeremy, one of Jeremy's friends personally, is the principal of a school in Missouri, and because they knew about the reenactment in advance from Jeremy, the school projected the reenactment in the cafeteria and let the students follow along on their personal devices during the school day. So that was a pretty cool just side result. Okay, and then our last poll, Erin, if you could bring that up for us. Okay, so how comfortable would you be with allowing people outside your institution to interpret your history? Okay, it looks like the majority of us at 54% were a little concerned. And I have to say, we were a little concerned too. And during some early conversations with Kansas Humanities Council, they were probably more concerned than we were. They had some suggestions that we have a script and just let people work off that script. They had suggestions that we approve all tweets before they went out. But frankly, we knew we didn't have the manpower to script the reenactment on the scale that we wanted it to reach. We had over 50 characters generating tweets. And sometimes, you know, more than one tweet a minute. So we didn't have the manpower to script the reenactment or even to approve the scripts. So what we did instead was to create a detailed timeline that reenactors could use to plan their script, to plan their own tweets. And then we also did a lot of other homework to make sure that the project that we ended up with was a quality project. One other thing in preparing is it's never too early to start promoting your social media campaign, and not just on the social media that it is that you plan to use. We reached out to the newspapers. In May, we were on the radio, and then again right before the raid, we were on television. So even though we like to think that a social media campaign goes viral all on its own, and in some ways it does, in other ways it doesn't. You have to promote it, what it is that you want to do in order for it to catch fire. So other things that we did to ensure that we had a quality product while we included the public, we very strategically recruited volunteers. That's probably one of the most important steps that we took. While the door was open to anybody that wanted to participate, we made sure that some of those essential roles were covered. We actually paid some actors a stipend to cover some of the essential roles. We had conversations about what if the person playing Quantrill oversleeps and doesn't show up to tweet. So we kind of ensured that we would have a core narrative even if some people didn't show up. And then we also strategically recruited volunteers for some of those other less important roles. So somebody who had been researching Lewis Carpenter for years and years, we asked that person to reenact Lewis Carpenter. We asked people to reenact their ancestors that were involved. We asked, the Eldridge Hotel to tweet as the proprietor of the Eldridge Hotel. So we tried to find those connections and find people who would be really invested in this. Then we also hosted 2 public meetings and had our scholars came to talk about historical context. We had real-life first-person reenactors demonstrate the craft to kind of show how they got into character. And then we created partnerships between Twitter experts and history experts so that they could share knowledge and share ideas. So it was really important, I think, to create this in real life team between all of our volunteers because everybody wanted so much to make sure they were pulling their own weight and that they weren't going to let their new friend that they just met through this project, they weren't going to let them down. Let's see, we have a question over here from Katie Montgomery. Did you define the characters? Were they historically accurate? Were they historically accurate with tweeters giving leeway to imagine their lives, or were more creative liberties taken? That's a good question. We created a list of characters that we wanted to be, that we knew we had first-person accounts for, and that we knew needed to be included. And so we created a list of characters. There were a few people who came to us and said, I want to tweet my grandpa and I know the story, and we said, oh, yep, they were involved. So we did a little bit of research to make sure they were involved and that the story that they were tweeting was accurate. But for the most part, yeah, there was leeway in creating your tweets, but we made sure that everyone had the materials that they needed, whether they were through the library actually created a special section that our reenactors could go and research. We have great sources online through things like Kansas Memory. And then, yeah, there is a little bit of creativity involved when you're writing your tweets. So we encourage people to be creative as long as they stayed in character and followed the historical narrative and the timeline that we provided them. We discussed different things like having a style guide and, not using modern abbreviations and those kind of things, but we decided that the simpler it was to participate, the better. And really, if you look at old letters, people writing in the 1860s are abbreviating things left and right. So we didn't worry really about strict language usage issues. So we just wanted it to be accessible both to our people who are participating and to the people who are following along. I hope that answers your question, Katie. All right. So how we kind of branded and pulled all this together, as I said, we had something like 50 characters registered with Twitter. They all had their own Twitter feed. So those tweets were all, or those, what do you call it, the handles, we call them handles. I don't know if that's the technical word. But everybody's Twitter handle kind of followed a pattern. So 1863 was included in the handle somewhere along with the person's name. We created a hashtag to tie all these tweets together, so all of our characters knew that if at all possible to use the QR1863 hashtag. Sometimes if they were particularly struggling to keep it within that 140 character count, the hashtag fell off, but almost all of the tweets used the hashtag. And then, make sure if you're using a hashtag for your campaign, make sure that you research it. So we kind of checked a few different hashtags. We wanted something that used as few characters as possible and something that nobody else was using. I'm sure you've all heard stories of some social media manager for, a fast food restaurant accidentally, or not accidentally, but seeing on the trending some hashtag, not researching it, and tweeting something trivial with the hashtag of something very serious. One that sticks out in my mind is a hashtag that was created to talk about violence against women, and there were a lot of tweets of places like, fast food or whatever. So that's the worst possible thing that could ever happen. So make sure if you're using a hashtag that you know that it's your hashtag, or that it's something that isn't connected to another completely different issue. So we had our handles, we had our hashtags. We also created a group in Twitter so that people could just follow our group of everybody that we knew who was tweeting and participating with us. And then we had a lot of people who were interested but who were concerned because they'd never used Twitter before or didn't know anything about it. So we pulled all of those we pulled all of that group, all of the people who were participating with us. We pulled that whole Twitter feed into a separate website so that there was a page on 1863lawrence.com that just showed the tweets that were happening for folks who weren't so Twitter savvy or didn't want to be Twitter savvy. Let's see. And there was a question, I think, over here. Oh, wait. Were the characters fictional or based on historical record? All the characters were based on historic record. There's one character who certainly existed in the past, but there's a little bit of myth that has grown up around this certain person's participation, and so that was kind of a struggle about how to deal with it. There was a person who was really interested in tweeting that story, and we did allow kind of that story to go ahead and be told. All of the rest of the characters were real, and their stories were as factually based as possible. One of our reenactors went so far as to go through volumes and volumes of this person's, the person they were reenacting had left volumes of diaries, and so she went through all of those diaries, and every single word she tweeted was something taken from that diary. Other people, I played a character, a fairly big character in Kansas history, Jim Lane, who was a senator and also a general during the Civil War, and he didn't leave as much or any really personal diaries or remembrances, didn't have a lot of letters. So the story of what he did during the raid is well documented, just not through his own words. So I had to kind of base on what we know about his character and his actions and do a little bit more creative writing there for him. So as we got ready for the raid, we really tried to spread the word, as I said before, using social media. All of our characters, I think, started tweeting in the summer, talking about different things like the weather in 1863 or national events. Several people tweeted about the battle at Gettysburg and that kind of thing, just to get people aware of the hashtag and kind of fall into this sense of this alternate universe that we were creating on Twitter. So so we spread the word any way that we could. And another thing, as I said, we wanted to get together in real life as we tweeted. So we worked with a local internet provider to make sure that our router and our wireless network was good. And then we had a final meeting / dress rehearsal on a particular, the anniversary of a particular event that folks in Lawrence would have probably been tweeting about. So we all came together here in the Carnegie Building, which is where we were going to tweet from, and had this final meeting to make sure that we could make sure that we weren't going to crash the router, really. Okay, I'm going to go through the actual day kind of quickly. So we all got up on August 21st really early in the morning and came together in the Carnegie Building. There's this big room with a historical exhibit, so there's pictures of Quantrill on the wall, so that was kind of cool to be tweeting together from there. We had a writer, a reporter from the Kansas City Star with us all day, and one of the Kansas City Morning News programs did their remote broadcasts from us. And we also had the doors open, so if people wanted to wander in and talk to us or, you know, get on a spare laptop that we had and kind of follow along with us, they could do that. Then that evening, we created another in real life program, a Talkback program with our program scholars. And just brought everybody together to talk about both the historical event and the reenactment. It was a very well attended program, and it was a really, I think, it was a really good way for us to share experiences, both as tweeting and as following and as what happened in the past. We talked a lot about the what-ifs early on when we were planning. We were concerned that the hashtag could be hijacked on Twitter. That was one of the reasons that we had the dedicated specific web page. And there's a lot of things that we brought up about, you know, regarding what if this and what if that never happened, and there are some things that happened that we never dreamed would have happened. Ultimately, we put as much control in place as we could with that separate website, but there's not control when you get on social media. So you have to do the best that you can. You have to plan for the worst and just kind of, you know, ride through all those other issues. One of the things that we never dreamed of happening were what we called rogue accounts. So there were folks in Lawrence who had heard about our plan, and one person in particular thought, well, that's the silliest thing ever, and but yet kind of couldn't look away, like it's going to be a train wreck kind of thing. And she registered her own account, Horse 1863, and we later learned that this person was a creative writing student at KU, but we didn't know who she was, and we didn't know anything about her. But throughout the summer, all these Horse 1863 tweets would show up in the spirit of what we were doing. So we found out later that she created this account really just to mess with us, but she researched enough to kind of keep up with what was happening, and once she started researching, she got really into it and really dug into the history, and she actually ended up turning up an account of a horse who caused a disruption during the raid and saved someone's life because of it. So we were really proud that we could take this skeptic and turn her into a participant. We ended up including her in the feed of official tweeters because all of her tweets were entertaining and in the spirit of what we were doing. So here's some quick numbers. We paid to get analytics for the week on the hashtag QR1863. So for the week, we reached 1.3 million accounts. 1,824 accounts used QR 1863. We trended worldwide. Analytics aren't perfect, so we know that some of those 1,824 accounts that used QR 1863 were spammers. So analytics aren't perfect, but they're the best way that you can track your reach on social media. Analytics weren't the only way that Twitter analytics, hashtag analytics weren't the only way that we tracked our reach. We know, for example, that that dedicated website that we had, that page we had, half of its traffic for the month of August came when we were doing the reenactment. So we know that folks were checking in on the web page. We know that folks were following along on Twitter. And the response was really quite overwhelming. One of the favorite things that we liked to hear during that day and shortly after was that people were late to appointments, or that they didn't get any work done that day because they were too busy following along with what was happening on Twitter with the reenactment. We were also pretty proud that no major hijacking of the project took place. There were early on a few folks who were like, "This is what's going on," and it wasn't folks within the reenactment who would point them to a news article telling what we were doing. It was outsiders who would respond to those criticisms really early on. So that was kind of cool that there were other folks who weren't participating necessarily, but who were really invested in the project. One thing that we didn't do was think long term. We didn't think about what necessarily we were going to do with these tweets once they were generated, or you know, what our goal was after August 21st, 2013. Frankly, we just wanted to get through that day. So if there was one thing that we could have a do-over on, that would be to have some long-term goals. Since then, we have had some discussions about the future of QR 1863. So we're sometime in the future going to develop a searchable database. We did pull all of the tweets into a few different Storify feeds. So I know some professors here in Kansas have used those feeds with their classes and whatnot. Okay, and then so we learned a lot of different things from this project. I think the one for me is that you can do this alone, but when you work with the community and you work with volunteers, you create a much bigger impact, and frankly, you end up with a much more rewarding project. So there's my email there under the picture of me passed out halfway through the day. And I think that does it for my official presentation, and we can open the floor for questions. And I think Erin was going to unmute everyone. Or you can still use the chat box or the question box to ask questions. Oh, okay. Aaron says, raise your hand if you have a question, and he'll unmute you one by one so that we don't have a big rush of folks talking at once. Okay, somebody asked if we would mind sharing the presentation in a PDF, and we're happy to do that. You can email me, and I think Aaron has it as well, but I'm happy to do that. How long did our sessions run? Katie Montgomery asked a question, and I'm going to ask Katie to clarify that question. Sarah Capon, are there any plans for future campaigns? Actually, there are a couple projects in the area. One not related to our story necessarily, but I just talked to some folks who are a group of Sons of American Revolution folks who want to do a reenactment of crossing the Potomac. So there are a lot of different things in works, I know, swirling around. Jeremy Ebersole has a question.
Hey, am I coming through? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Cool. Were you or your organization with so many partners, I guess, was there one, I guess, group or person who was kind of in charge of aligning everyone else to make sure that stuff was getting done?
So we had a committee of about 5 people, and that they represented Freedom's Frontier, the Lawrence Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Watkins Museum, the Lawrence Social Media Club, and the Lawrence Public Library. So we met every couple weeks between November and the actual day of the reenactment. So we were doing a lot of planning and a lot of managing and a lot of, okay, you're going to do this piece and she's going to do that piece and I'm going to take care of that piece. And actually my office is in the same building as the Lawrence Convention and Visitors Bureau. So myself and Christine, who was with the Lawrence Convention and Visitors Bureau, we could, kind of spearhead it together and make sure that everything was getting done together. So yeah, there was the coordinating committee, and then I would say the 2 of us we weren't like voted as head of that or anything, but we kind of just fell into that role.
Okay, great.
Any other questions? Katie asked, Katie's hand is up, so maybe you can unmute Katie. Oh, we don't have audio from you, Katie, so you're going to have to type your question in. And you had asked earlier how long did the sessions run, and I'm going to guess that you were asking about the sessions that we had for the public before the Twitter reenactment, the sessions that we have for our participants. And they usually, we had programming, whether it was a presentation from a reenactor or from a scholar, that lasted probably about 30, 40 minutes. And then we had we just kind of left our building open and created little pockets where people could, go and have a conversation with somebody to kind of get their facts checked, or if they wanted somebody to look at their tweets, or if they had a question about where to find particular documents. So we had these little kind of, I guess you would call them informal breakout sessions afterwards. I would say, I think about 2 hours for each of those public sessions. Part of it dedicated to, here's the presentation and program, part of it dedicated to, networking or working things out together, tweeter to tweeter, or, visiting one of those informal breakout groups. Any other questions? Okay, well, thanks everybody again so much for calling in. You can always email me, jmcpike@freedomsfrontier.org. I just had an email a couple of days ago asking about different aspects of this project. We're always willing, happy, and able to answer those questions. I know some other folks who have done reenactments completely in-house, and so I can forward those to you if you're wondering, well, I just want to do it on a smaller scale and just do it with our staff. So we have some people who have done that too. And yeah, so feel free to follow up, and we'll try to get that PDF out one way or another. The actual duration of the reenactment, so Quantrills rode into town at 6 o'clock at 5 o'clock in the morning. 5 o'clock in the morning, not daylight savings time. So we went with, if we take away daylight savings time, we can start at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the sun will be in the same place when we're doing our tweets as it was in 1863, plus we get to sleep an hour longer. So we started at 6 o'clock in the morning. The tweets were mostly over by about 2 o'clock, and actually most of our reenactors were done by 9 or 10 because their part had been finished, whether they were killed by the raiders or their husband was killed or whatnot. So most of the action was, I would say, between 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock, a little bit spilling over to 2 o'clock, and then we had our talkback session in the evening from maybe like 6:30 to 8:30 kind of thing. If you have any other questions, feel free to send them in or raise your hand. I think that's it for now. Candy, you have wrap-up things?
Yes, thank you, Julie. I wish if we were all in a room together here, you'd be hearing us applaud ecstatically, so I'll just do it for you. And so thank you so much for sharing your experiences with social media and campaign, the social media campaign, and how you can tell a story and involve people in your community in the story. And I think it's a brilliant idea. I look forward to seeing how other people are taking this kind of concept and doing more with it in their community. So again, thank you for sharing that with us. Don't forget, we'll be sending you, as soon as this session ends, the GoToWebinar will send you a little evaluation. I think I kept it to 5 questions. So if you can answer those really quick for us, and that would be very helpful. Also, maybe you can share the upcoming webinars with your colleagues. The February 2nd, Selling Your Site Using Iowa Core. February 25th, Best Practices in Telling the Modern Ag Story. And then on March 4th, I'll be talking about the general grant application. Thank you again for attending, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.